Okay, so we're starting with our first tree. So this is tree number one. Before I get too far along with telling you what to do with this, one thing I neglected to mention in labeling the papers, make sure you do label them. The first one is pine. So we're going to be doing the pine tree, P-I-N-E. Also at the bottom of the paper, write your name, your full name, not just your first name, but your full name. I have lots of students with the same first name, and some of them have the same first and second name. So don't forget to put your period number on the paper too. If I can't see them and they get mixed in with each other's, how am I going to give you a grade? All right, so please make sure you label everything. It's so much easier to put the grades into the grade book too. So once you've got it labeled pine for pine tree, and put your name and period, you're going to be drawing with me step by step how to get a pine tree kind of sketched out. This is only so you learn how to apply one or more trees into your final artwork. All right, you can choose any of the three trees or any variety of tree based on those three that you want to do. And I recommend that maybe you look at real trees from your window, or go online and look at trees. If you've got trees in the backyard or something like that, look at them and see their structure. It's easier if you do this though before you do it to simplify. All right. So we're starting with a pine tree. As you can see with the handout that I've shared with you, a pine tree is basically a cone shape. It has a narrower part at the top, and it comes at an angle to the left, angle to the right, and then almost a straight edge at the bottom, and then it's got its trunk that starts below the bottom of its leaves. In this case, they're needles. And it goes up the center of that as kind of like a central axis. So it's basically a cone, like you've already learned how to draw. So you're going to be drawing this about that size onto the paper to make it work. Now the cone has to have a stem to it. So the trunk of the tree that goes from the base all the way to the top is basically a cylinder. And you've already learned how to draw a cylinder too. Notice on this cylinder and on this cone, you can see the variations from light to dark as it curves away from the light source, because there's one light in this room that's really strong. It hits here most strongly and gradually changes from top to bottom. Just gets wider at the bottom than it is at the top. Wider, like thicker, wider, not whiter. All right, same thing happens on this cylinder. Same thing, right, with the light hitting it. So we're going to talk about that with our marking system too. All right, so we're going to start off with, as the direction sheet that I shared with you says, and you might want to reflect back onto that, you're going to do a lightly sketched stick tree figure of the trunk and the major branches of the pine tree. This one starts down at the bottom, and remember, it's basically a cylinder, so we don't want it to be just a straight line. It's below our eye level, so we're going to gently curve it at the bottom, about in the middle of the paper. You don't want to get it too far one way or the other. I got it a little far that way, so I'm going to just move it over a little bit. And notice I'm not making it really wide. I'm making it small enough that I can alter it as I need to go. And then the trunk of the tree goes up to the top about like that, from the left side and from the right side. It just doesn't have to be perfect, and it just goes from thick at the bottom to thin at the top. It tapers in toward the top. As a tree grows, the new growth always starts at the bottom and expands outward and upward. So this growth here is probably older than this growth is up here, because it's narrower up here. All right, just know that. And as a tree grows, it pushes outward and it breaks the outer skin of the tree trunk and makes what we call bark. And I'll show you some marking systems to make the appropriate look to the bark of the tree trunk. From that, you'll notice that it shows you on our example handout that the branches come outward and upward like this. So they don't just start at the outer edges. They start at the front and come forward. They start at the back and go outward that way. So they don't just come from the sides and up. And as they get nearer the top, they go more straight up, rather, kind of upward more than outward. So it's a curved structure like that, and some of them are right in front of us. So put a couple of them just like that, going from one side to the other, rocking back and forth. The next step is we put in what are called sub-branches. Now each one of these branches has two edges to it, so you can put those in if you want, right? So there's an upper part of the branch and a lower part. There's an upper part and a lower part to this one, upper and lower. So just a few of them. You don't need to overdo it. They don't have to be perfect, as a matter of fact, because a lot of it is going to be covered by what we call foliage. Foliage is the leaves, the needles in this case, and the cluster of them. Now, like I was starting to say, there are sub-branches, branches that branch off of branches. They're called branches because they branch off. Clever name, right? So we're going to take some smaller branches from these bigger ones and go outward. You don't need a lot of them, and you don't want them to go too much out of that triangular shape. Remember, there are some that are coming from behind the tree too, so you want to kind of fill it in a little bit. So those are called sub-branches. And you don't have to do a lot of them on this one because the foliage is going to cover a lot of them. All right, so that's the basic start. Let me move this closer. I just realized how far back I was. So let me just show you what I've done. I've drawn in the little smiley face for the base of the trunk because it's a cylinder. It curves, it has an ellipse down here at the bottom. We only see the front end, the rest of it, and it tapers to the top from the side to the side going upward. And then we put in the branches and then the sub-branches, right? So that's what it shows in the step number 1. As it says, most evergreen trees are pretty triangular, like the cone here, but not all of them are. Some of them, like the one in the example paper, branch off, and split. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep it simpler. But this is the basic structure of any pine tree that you might see out in nature. The next step is to block in the major areas of foliage. The foliage, like I said, is the leaves, the needles, and they just kind of hover, and they're kind of like this. They especially on this type of tree, they're more horizontal than they are anything else. And yes, they are in front of the trunk of the tree. And this isn't important. It's not important that you make a lot of them or that you do it don't make them dark because you don't want them to show up. But those are the major areas. The next step is to start using what is called a marking system. So we're going to do a little bit of it on the trunk itself. The marking system for this, I'll turn this paper over and just show you, and you can do the same thing on the back of your paper if you want to. The marking system for the pine tree's trunk is it goes like this along the trunk. I'll just draw the edges of the trunk a little bit. So the marking system to create the bark of the tree is more vertical, and it's kind of like scribbling, and it's okay if it goes out of the edges a little bit because as the tree grows and expands, it tends to break it apart, and they do kind of slide a little, or push out of the outer edges a little bit. Now let's just say we wanted the light to be coming from this direction onto the paper, right? So we're going to leave this edge lighter and make this edge darker with our marking system. So we're just going to put a little bit more of the marking system on this side. You don't want to completely darken it in, and because it's a curved surface, you want to make it a gradual change from the lighter side to the darker side. Now, if it's hard for you to do on this smaller piece of paper, you can do the same thing with the tip of your pencil. It's just a little bit more time consuming to do it with the tip of your pencil. All right, so we're going to do that with the marking system on the trunk first. Don't overdo it because it might obscure the branches a little bit too much. And I'm going to put it behind the branches, right? It's inside and it's being covered by the branches, so we want to do it first. Look how fast that goes, right? It's a real quick marking system. And it goes from bottom to top, and it's darker on one side than the other side. I'm doing it so the light's coming from the left-hand side, so as it curves away from that light source, it gets darker here, lighter there. Now on the foliage side, the marking system for it, if you look at the handout, it shows you that the foliage is kind of linear. It's like this. So if you use your tip of your pencil now, I'll turn the paper over again and just show you. Use the tip of your pencil, and you're going to go into those areas of foliage that you've already drawn and off of the branches. You're going to do this with the tip. It's kind of a scribble, and it just follows the edges of the foliage that you've drawn in place. And it follows the branches a little bit. Don't overdo it, but it's a real quick way. You don't want to let them be loopy. You want them to be spiky, like this. If they get loopy like that, then you're doing a different tree's marking system for its branches, for its foliage. So you want to do really spiky marks like this into the areas of foliage. I'm going to start up here and just show you. See how quick that goes? You just kind of follow a branch and you let them be spiky, and at the very tip they're really spiky, just a few of them. And then do the same thing for another branch, and yes, they do overlap, so they might get really dark where they overlap, and that would be a natural case. Don't let it get too wide up at the top, right? It's wider at the bottom than it is at the top, and they're going to be overlapping. The trunk, don't forget, they don't just happen side to side. They go in front of the trunk and behind the trunk. And they follow the branches mostly. Remember, you didn't have to really even draw in the areas where this foliage goes, because you're probably going to go outside of those areas anyway. It just naturally happens when you do this kind of scribble marking system technique. Don't forget to go in front of the tree trunk as you do it. And I want you to completely go from top to bottom of the tree to get the 5 points for this exercise. So you're going to go all the way from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree, doing the same marking system. Don't let them get bigger and the marks get bigger. Just have more of them at the base of the tree. I'm just even going to bring it out a little bit more than I already had. And yes, there might be a sub branch that comes off this way, and maybe another one that goes up that way. So you're going to fill it in. All right, so you're going to do the entire tree with the marking systems. After you put the skeleton of the tree in place, do the marking system that shows the foliage and the bark of the tree. When you're done with the pine tree, go ahead and get your piece of paper that you've marked for the oak/elm and go to that tree for the next video. All right, good luck.